Hey, what's up? Welcome back to another video right here on Free Will Photos. Today, we are going to work on an Astro Photography edit. Now, I've never done Astro Photography, and the images that I'm using today are actually coming from a subscriber of the channel. Her name is Leanne. So I want to say thank you to Leanne for trusting me with her images to build this composite inside of ON1, and hopefully you guys find it valuable. If you do, you got to smash the like button, and if you're new, consider subscribing. And then the last thing that I want to say before I dive into the edit is, if you want to pick up ON1 Photo RAW, consider using the affiliate links down in the description box below. I do make a small commission. It's at no extra charge to you, and everyone who supports this channel through purchasing on those links is greatly appreciated. Now, let's go ahead and jump into the edit. As you can see, I've already started working on this, and I'm about 4 hours into working on this. And that's not to say that it took me 4 hours just to get to here. It took me 4 hours to figure out what it is that I needed to do in order to combine the images, because the key to working with multiple images inside of ON1 Photo RAW is layers. And there's so many different ways that you can use layers, and I'm not going to get into it in this video. But for my case today, I'm just going to turn off this top layer. What I did is I took one of the images and I made that my background layer. And that's the one that we're looking at right here. And that's actually what the canvas size is set to. Then what I did is I clicked the plus icon, and you can see that there's other images in here. This is the on photo file that I'm currently working on, but these are the 4 images that Leanne provided to me. And I only took 2 of them. I took the 25 seconds at 3200 ISO and the 25 seconds at 6400 ISO. And I combined those into this on photo file, or I stacked them as layers. Really straightforward. If you're not familiar with layers, go check out my master class on layers. I'll leave a link to that in the description if that's something you are interested in. But with that being said, once I put them over here, I placed my base exposure, or at least the exposure that I want everything to kind of be tuned to. I set that down here as my first layer, and then I brought in my foreground layer over the top. Now, what took the longest time was figuring out which masking tools would be the best for this particular scene. And I think that everyone who does this, your scenes are going to be different. Your needs for masking are going to be different. So take this with a grain of salt, but understand that this is something that you have to work with. You'll notice that in the base frame, we have these black silhouetted trees and these bushes that are peeking up over the horizon. And in the final cutout, I actually left those in there because the images weren't perfectly aligned. And I even used the actual alignment tool, but these images, they weren't perfectly aligned, and that's not a dig at Leanne or anyone. That's just life. Sometimes you can't get things perfect, so you have to work with what you can. And so instead, I just kind of turned those into a shadow in the background for the trees. You probably wouldn't have noticed it if I wasn't showing this to you, but I did want to point that out, because when it came to masking, I had to do quite a few things. So let me show you what the mask looks like. This is the final version of the mask, and this is a combination of a few different things. This is a line mask tool, or a few different line mask tools, which I'll show you. This is the quick mask AI, and then I also used the regular brush in areas where there just wasn't a tool necessary, or a AI tool that would get me what I was looking for. The reason why I'm telling you all of this is you have to understand how to use all of the masking tools inside of ON1, so you can make selections that are more finite, or for some of these more organic things where the trees kind of blended in with the night sky, especially on the foreground image that we're using here. With those trees blending in on the sky, let me see if I can bring up what this image looks like. So this is the foreground image, and you can see those leaves, they kind of stand out. Let me zoom in. The leaves kind of stand out over the sky, but they're not perfectly standing out over the sky, especially when you start making a mask. And AI tools will have a hard time with this, and that's why you have to have the ability to use other tools. So let me show you what I did with this. Let's go ahead and pull that density back up. And for those of you who are wondering, like, Chris, what did you just do? If you pull the density all the way down after you've applied a mask, you essentially put 100% white all over your canvas. And if you pull it all the way up, then you put 100% black all over the canvas, except for in the areas that you painted. So let me just show you that in practice. So at 100%, you can see that I have black here in the areas where I don't want the image to show. And as I pull this down, you'll see that it goes gray. And what that does is it brings back some of that original image. Now, this could be extremely helpful if you want to kind of blend a cutout where the foreground is more opaque than the background, or whatever, less opaque than the background. You could do that. There's times when density helps, but the way that I use it, especially when I'm working with layers, is I just reduce the density all the way down and back up, just so I can see what I'm doing with each of my masks. All right, so that's all that I did there with the density. Let's go ahead and pull that back up, and I'm gonna hit, or actually I'm gonna stay right here because I wanna show you kind of what I did with this mask. So the first mask, we'll make sure that I have that layer selected. The first mask was just a quick mask AI tool, and there's nothing special there. You click, drag, you drop, and it's all good to go. But then you have to do a little bit of cleanup, and that's where the line mask tool comes in. Now, if I hover over this, you can see I just kind of made some organic shapes outside of the image, and I painted to, or I opted to erase the areas that are outside. So if you're familiar with working inside of Photoshop and creating a selection and then erasing everything inside of that selection, that's essentially what I just did here. Then of course I did the same thing on the inside because I wanted to cut out so I can see the background of the sky in between the trees. So I did the same thing on the inside. And what's cool with the decision that I made in regards of leaving those shadows is I'm starting to get some of those organic shapes that are happening in the background here. And it just works for this particular image. So if I come back over here and pull down on my density, you can see that those shadows don't belong there, but I have some organic shapes that are here in the foreground. They're not really adding that much interest to the overall image. So I was, making some creative decisions here, and I said, okay, I don't really need that. So that's the reason why I just went ahead and cut all of that out, leaving the background shapes that are in silhouette here, leaving those in the original image. And that's kind of helping make these trees a little bit more dimensional in the overall frame. It just happened to work out that way. It's not ideal. Sometimes, things just happy accidents. Now, what I'm looking at here, or what we're looking at here, is the completed version of what I did to the sky. So this is what the sky looked like without any of the edits that I've applied to the image so far. And this is what the sky looks like when I actually got everything done. And I didn't apply anything in effects. I just worked with tone and color. And again, I'm not a astro photographer, so I'm not entirely sure what is always the most important thing inside of astro photography, but I imagine the formation, the Milky Way here, is probably the subject of this particular shot, or at least I'm calling it that. And then you just have some foreground interest to help kind of draw your eye into this area. So moving forward is the rest, or during the rest of the edits while I'm moving forward, I'm going to try and highlight this Milky Way through the decisions that I make. And that's kind of where I wanted to pick up today's video, because again, all of this, building composites is very straightforward, right? You add in your images and then you mask some stuff away, and that can take time. There's so many different concepts. Understanding what the tools do is the best way of getting to this point. And I do have, again, the layers tutorial, and I'm working on an advanced masking tutorial, because even removing the line mask tool after you use an AI tool, that can make a difference, right? And that's something that I haven't really talked about, but I promise it's coming. So just bear with me as I continue to work through other content. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and create the rest of this image. Now, I have not applied any noise correction or noise reduction. Both of these images are raw images, and I only corrected or modified the exposure of the sky just to make it a little bit more interesting and make it a little bit more punchy. And these were shot at 2 different ISOs. So you have 2 options available to you. The first option is you could just run no noise AI on each of these layers and figure that out for yourself. But for me, I'm just going to go ahead and create a new stamped layer that's going to combine these 2 layers, which is exactly what I want it to do. And I guess before I did that, I probably should have applied the lens correction to the sky, but I'm not going to worry about that. Oh, okay. I did apply the lens correction, so I forgot to go over that with you. I just hit the little blue circle here, applied the lens correction, and I let that do its thing. So let me show you what that looks like, just so that way you can see. So without the lens correction and with the lens correction, it just helps out. I did not use the lens correction on the foreground element, and that's because it was giving me a different cutout. So I just went ahead and left this as is. I think that this fits the scene better, and that's again a creative decision. You may do something completely different. So now we'll go ahead and turn on our composite image, and just for my clarity, I'm just going to label this composite, so that way I know that these are, or this image is my composited image. And now I work with this like I would normally work inside of ON1 Photo RAW. So first thing that I want to do is reduce the noise in this image. So I'm going to turn on no noise AI, and hopefully that's going to clean up some of the noise that's in the sky. I'm not as concerned about noise in the foreground. That's not as impactful, and you can see it does clean up the noise in the sky there. So I'm just going to leave it on the default settings so we can continue moving with the tutorial here. And I'll hit apply and let ON1 think itself through. So now I have a cleaned up noise sky, or a sky with less noise in it, and I'm actually satisfied with the way that that looks. So it's time to kind of bring out the character of the Milky Way here, and maybe even work with the foreground elements. So the first thing that I'm going to do with this photo after the noise reduction, and I'm not going to worry about Brilliance AI because I'm not sure that's going to get me what I want for this particular image. So what I'm going to do is just pull down on the exposure a little bit, and that's going to help me with making this sky that much darker. Now, obviously I'm losing some light here in the foreground, but we'll place that back in locally. Then the next thing, I'll probably boost the contrast just a little bit, and let's see if working on the vibrance or saturation helps out. Yeah, maybe something like this. and just a little bit of saturation. So just helping make this photo that much more interesting. This is all to taste, right? So I'll open the shadows a little bit and see if I push the midtones. And you got to be careful because an image can start to fall apart, and you can see that over here on the right side. So I want to make sure that I don't push it too hard, but I definitely wanted to push it just a little bit. All right, so now we're going to do some local adjustments, and these are going to be very simple local adjustments. All right, the first one, I'm just going to bring back some of that foreground interest. So we'll open some shadows. I'm going to hit the letter M on the keyboard to get my masking bug, and just using a linear gradient. Look at that, we're opening up a lot of those shadows, but we're not going to leave it that high up. I just wanted to show where that's going and be able to see it, and then we could just dial this back, and then I'll pull up on my contrast, or maybe pull down on the contrast. Yeah, and then we can pull down on the exposure here as well, and maybe even dial back these shadowed areas just a little bit more. I don't think that this area needs to be that bright. It's not the star of the show, at least to me. It's just some foreground interest. In fact, I'll even pull down on some structure here because I don't think that it's as important as the Milky Way is. So now that I have that going, I'm going to click on, and I do hope this is the Milky Way. It is, because it's in the title. Come on, Chris, you could do better. All right, so now what I'm going to do is increase the exposure over the Milky Way. And the way I'm going to do that is with another radial gradient, and this time I'm going to use the vignette tool. So I want to protect the edges, so I'm going to put it into the center. Click here. This is now going to add, and I did that backwards. I always do this backwards. There we go. So now I am applying this brightening effect right here up the center of the frame, and who knows, I may even let this spill over a little bit onto those palm trees in the foreground. We'll see, but I feel like that's too large, so we'll go a little bit smaller, because it doesn't need to be like this drastic enhancement, right? The idea here is just to give the Milky Way a little bit more attention in the frame. Now, that is way too much exposure, so let's just pull this back. And in fact, let's work with highlights in there. Maybe we can make this stand out just a little bit more with highlights, midtones, and I'll bring down my black point in there so it contrasts a little bit more. Maybe pull up on the whites in there. And you can see how that's just like popping out of the frame just a little bit more than everything else, right? So boom. Boom. So that's all that I wanted to do with that. Now, I think that this photo needs a crop. And in fact, I know it needs a crop because I have some weird alignment issues down here. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and hit the letter C on my keyboard, bring up my cropping tool. And in the new version of ON1 Photo RAW, we have this AI crop. Let's see what happens when I use the AI crop. If I don't like it, I'll just readjust it. And I can't be on freeform though. So let's go with original ratio. And I don't know what it thinks the original ratio is, since I did manipulate some of it, but it is what it is. We'll go ahead and put it there, and then we'll click the AI tool and see how well it does. Okay, so it didn't do bad. I think that it went a little lower than I would have gone with the crop on this particular image, because again, I think that seeing the entire Milky Way matters more. And I'm using this diagonal because essentially what I want to do is I want the viewer's eye to come into the frame somewhere, and they'll see the trees, and then hopefully the trees are going to help anchor them into the sky, right? There's negative space around the subject here, negative space around the subject here. And so what I need to do is put the subject, I think, works best in the center of the frame with the main point somewhere in this center diamond. So what that means is I need to bring in my edges and then reposition. So the main point of the Milky Way is right here in the center of the frame. So I have an element over here on the left. I guess this is one of the triangles, and I may be using this tool the wrong way, but this is just how I personally use the tool. Let me know how you use the diagonals in the cropping tool down in the comment section. And for those of you who aren't aware, and if you're always looking at the rule of thirds, if you come up here to the overlay drop down menu, you can select different options. But if you want a keyboard shortcut, just press the letter O while you are in the cropping tool, and it will cycle through all of the cropping overlays. So for me, I've been using diagonals. It's just been my thing. I switch it from time to time, but just wanted to share that anyhow. All right, so let's go ahead and commit this and see what it looks like. And so I think that it's probably a little bit of a tighter shot than I would want it to be. So let's go ahead and go back to C, or back to the cropping tool, and we'll just pull out on the edges. I'm going to bring more into the frame because I think that it was just too tight of a crop. It needs a crop, but not that tight. So, and this is all subjective. Everyone's going to work on images differently, but this is just what I think the image needs. So we'll go something like that there. Now I think it's a little bit more balanced in the frame. The subject is pretty clear, but we're going to make it even more clear by coming over to effects, and we're going to throw in a vignette, which is right here. We'll throw a big softy on here, and I'm just going to pull down the opacity, and then we'll grab the center marking point, and I'm just going to drag it up so that way it's right. It's vignetting around the Milky Way there. So if I turn this off and on, you can see all it does is really just dims down the foreground, which again, in my opinion, isn't the most important element in the frame. And I could, if for whatever reason this doesn't seem to, like if it's too dark down there at the bottom, I have two ways of fixing this. I can pull up on the brightness of the vignette as a whole, considering my corners are already dark because it's the sky at nighttime, so that already shows off a lot of darkness. Or I could just mask. I could place a mask in here and then use a brush and paint away this bottom portion. But I think pulling up on the brightness and balancing the opacity did the trick. So there we have the final edit. So let's take a look at the before and after. This is the before image of the image without any of the edits, at least the composite version of the image. And here is the final version that I think looks really good. Let me know your questions down in the comment section below. And if you want to learn how to use ON1 Photo RAW, consider signing up for a coaching call with me. You can do that by using the link in the description box below. Until next time, I want you to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.